And we're going to continue this theme of big picture. We're actually going and getting a global worldview with our next speaker. And I'm delighted to introduce Merja Kajava, founder at Aavista. Welcome, Merja. How are you this afternoon?
Thank you so much. I'm good, and I will indeed now try to take the global view on the mobility APIs.
I love that your Aavista strapline is a data refinery company.
So yes, indeed, because APIs are data, and they are dealing with the data.
Excellent. So perhaps you could just get your slides up and check that we can see those fine. That looks great. So you've got 20 minutes for the next session, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for questions at the end. The stage is yours.
Thank you. So I will kind of continue on the API and the mobility theme as long with the previous speakers, and I will now talk from two different angles. One is, how do you actually consume lots of mobility APIs? This is for data platform for future mobility, which is integrating micromobility APIs to provide insights for bike sharing, scooter usage. And the other angle is the standards, the data models for mobility as part of the Mass Alliance technology and standard subgroups. So I will talk about from this angle, and also about what is local and what is global, or are they the same? So from this talk is also for API providers, seen when trying to integrate over 200 APIs from around the world. And this is to get shared bike feeds, live data, and to build predictions to see that where do you find bikes when you need to ride. And this platform is now actually, as we speak, collecting data from over 200 cities, mostly from Europe and North America, even South America, some cities in Asia. And I will now provide some kind of situations what have been encountered when integrating these APIs. So these are kind of also tips what you need to take into account when you are designing APIs, when you are providing APIs, especially when there are lots of API consumers for your APIs. And now the question is that when you are building APIs, especially in the mobility, it might happen that your APIs are just, for example, for local trains, buses, trams, or even shared bikes. But so that's a question that, are you only building for local usage, for your city, for your region, or even your country, or do you need to consider anything outside your vicinity within the mobility? And the answer is that maybe you should consider also that where the APIs will be consumed. This is one API which we encountered when integrating the data, and this is in French. And of course, one needs to have some vocab dictionary to interpret the API content, the possible responses. So this is one place to think about when you are building APIs, that who is going to use it? Is it only going to be the local, and are even the developers who are consuming the data, can they understand your language? Because English is the lingua franca in the API areas. Another Another thing, even the APIs is the surface, but underneath it's good to also consider that will your API be ever used outside your region or country? So do you consider also how do you represent, for example, person identifiers, company identifiers? How do you handle the monetary amounts? Do you need to also include the currency code in your APIs and underneath in your systems? So this is kind of important to think about, even if you build a local system, because it might happen that you need to scale up from local to global. So it's good to be prepared. Another situation, kind of when integrating the APIs, calling the APIs, and even onto real life situation, you might hit issues when the API is not responding or there are some issues. So this is one case when contacting the customer service for the service provider, and this is what kind of was replied. I recognized the language because this was in Brazil. It says about bilingual. So Google Translate comes to help, and you actually have to send the request in Portuguese. And then the question comes, when you have complicated technical things, can the translator actually get it properly handled? And also, so this is something to consider when you are API provider, that how do you provide the developer support? Do you need to be prepared to handle also other languages? So this is something, practical thing, what has been encountered. Another situation which happens not so often, but still, that when the API is not responding, you indeed might need to contact the customer support, developer support, or if the API kind of might even have a status page. And this is something that should be really kind of offered if you provide a API with multiple API consumers. So the status page is really, really useful because the API consumers, the users, can immediately see that is the API alive and running. And you can even typically subscribe to the notifications if something is ongoing on the API, when, for example, for maintenance breaks. This one is actually a screenshot from the Fin traffic site. So you can actually see for each API this operative status. And there are also cases that the API changes. And this is something what really happens when API is used and put to production. So it's actually good to be prepared to do the API provisioning policy in beforehand. Also think about how do you deprecate the APIs, how do you communicate about the upcoming changes. And this would be really good to be published on the developer site, which would also should include the API references, the documentation, and maybe some getting started guidelines on how do you contact when you have some issue with the API. And as already seen here, the mobility does not stop at borders. This is something to consider, and another viewpoint is that you would like to use the standards if such exist. And especially in the mobility area, there are or even standards which need to be kind of utilized depending on the domain. For mobility area, public transportation is quite well covered in the standards. And this is basically scheduled traffic. Trains, buses, trams, metro, subway. This is something which is scheduled, and it is quite, there are multiple standards for this purpose. But things change because now for the past years we have had alternative modes, new ways on the mobility ecosystem, especially with the micromobility, shared bikes, scooters. We have on-demand passenger services, car sharing, even delivery robots. So this picture is changing, and this means that the existing standards need to take this into account, or new standards need to kind of be in place to handle this. And these are really global things on the mobility side, because there are lots of also service providers who are operating, even starting locally, but they are regionally, but they are really going global. So that's why the standards are really important as well. Another angle is the domain, if you will, the customer journey during the traffic, because you have the planning, booking, payment, the actual traveling, and after sales actions. In addition, there are lots of back office operations which need to be tackled through the APIs as well. And there are also different stakeholders. For example, government might need some data also from the mobility operator. So this is kind of a new dimension on the standards. So considering all these different viewpoints, this is a kind of an attempt to build or show the ecosystem for mobility data models. This is something what we have done last year at the Mass Alliance data model subgroups, to trying to see that how do these mobility standards relate to each other, or which one is the most suitable for which purpose. And as you can see, this is quite a right ecosystem. The orange bubbles here represent the organizations or institutions who are governing the standardization work. For example, ISO is the global standard organization, SEN is the European Standardization Committee, and they are partnering with the ISO. EU is also providing even directives also for mobility area. For example, the NAP, the National Access Point, which was discussed earlier in earlier sessions, is something which is coming from European Union. There are also some kind of regional things. ODIN is a project from Nordic countries. MDS, mobility data, GPFs, originated from from the North America, but they are now global. NetX is also very important in the public transportation area. And this one is also being amended to handle the new modes with the micromobility, shared cars. And something which is now especially kind of increasing into importance is the data spaces from Gaia X. And there are also additional projects around the data spaces, also for mobility data spaces. So this picture is a snapshot, and it is actually kind of growing all the time. So but the good thing is that these different standards data models, they are being kind of negotiated so that not every standard body is doing their own thing. So there is lots of cooperation ongoing with these standards. One interesting here to note is the TOMP API, which is really an API specification for the mass mobility as a service area. And this originated from the Netherlands, and it is now being in use in Benelux countries, even going outside the Central Europe. So this is really kind of a living thing, the ecosystem, and it is changing quite often, quite rapidly, especially with these new modes which are arriving. And even the self-driving cars are really affecting this ecosystem. So there are a couple of takeaways from this talk. First of all, if you are API provider, do follow the industry standards in your domain, if such exist, because that will be also easier for your life. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And actually, sometimes you must follow, depending on the area. And when building APIs, do consider that local is global. So try to think also what might happen if your API actually goes across the borders. And the developer side is really something which will help your life, not only your API users, consumer lives, your own life, when you just can put all the necessary details, the status pages, the release notes to the developer side. But we are now living really interesting times with the mobility and with the APIs. Things are going really, really rapidly ahead. So thank you so much.
Merja, thank you so much for that presentation. It really was fascinating to get this perspective of what's going on in the and emerging in the mobility ecosystem. We had a question while you were speaking from Juha in the audience. She pointed out where you had the picture at the slide with the emerging and changing numbers of mobility vehicles. So you included delivery robots in the ecosystem picture. So does this mean that you can expect to see integration between logistics systems and mobility systems? What are you observing in that space?
That's actually a good point, because these are kind of also merging together. So the logistics is very important thing, and it's merging. And one thing which I kind of forgot to mention is that there are also a kind of competition between these standards. So yes, because it means that the standards are standards, you have data models, abstract concepts, but who is actually going to use this? That's the key thing. So something which has grown very from small, if you have lots of providers using that standard, that's only when it's really kind of has effect.
And I can imagine too that, because this API-enabled world is creating sectors and ecosystems that traditionally, built up over many decades and got their own particular language and ways of working and standards bodies, that you're now naturally going to have some tension when those standards don't necessarily correlate. You commented about standards needing to keep pace and keep up to date with these changes. Could you give any good examples of where you think a standard or a group of standards is doing well at keeping pace with this dramatic change that's going on?
For example, mobility data, which is managed from Canada, actually. They have GPFS standard. It started with the shared bikes. It is now including the scooters, and now they are expanding, creating a new version which also includes shared vehicles. So that's a very good kind of example.
Canada is a place to watch.
Yes, yes. Actually, but Europe is another place, because Europe has lots of ongoing, and there are regions. For example, in the Benelux, Maas is very big. In Germany, data spaces, we have lots of things ongoing in Germany for data spaces, and Nordics also is very active on the mobility area. And Norway, I would like to, Finland and Norway are really active.
Really leading. And why do you think that the Nordic, or these countries have been able to take a lead in this space? I wonder what it is about it, apart from the fact that you're very mobility and weather, for example, in the previous conversation.
Maybe Nordic countries are kind of small enough that you can maybe it's easier in a smaller country or smaller regions to push new things forward. That's one thing for sure.
That's an interesting observation. I've spent a lot of my time working in Australia, and used to talk about New Zealand and even Australia to an extent, often being the kind of place where you could get, or within a state, you can get, as you say, quite holistic decision making and thinking going on, which I guess is absolutely essential in solving these really big systemic problems.
Yes, actually, I think Australia is also quite active on Mars area as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. And what are some of the things that you and the organization are kind of most focused on for the next 12 months? What are the things that the biggest problems that you're helping solve at the moment?
On the Mars Alliance, on the data model subgroup now, the next thing is to look at the data spaces for the mobility, and also the marketplaces, that where do you find actually the APIs which you can use, and where can you publish the APIs which you can use. So those are the two areas which are now kind of in the upcoming months. And one thing is also the identity. If you are trialing, how do you identify yourself in a secure manner?
And what are some of the answers that are emerging for those big questions?
I guess now there are more questions than answers at this point, but this is something, especially if you think about over the borders traveling, how do you identify yourself?
Of course.
For example, making multiple legs on your journey. Let's say from Germany to Netherlands, to Belgium, to France. How do you identify yourself? How do you make your journey just with one identity?
And who are the sorts of, very good. And who are the sorts of people and organizations that need to get together and solve this? You had the map with all of the orange and green, and what are some of the things that you've done, or you and people work on to actually get those different groups talking together?
These kind of these standardization bodies are kind of one of these good things, because even if you have these multiple things with SEN, NetEx, Transmodal, Mass Alliance, people are talking with each other, so they are aware of things ongoing.
That's
communication here is the key thing.
Sorry, what was that?
Communication is really a key thing.
I apologies. You'll have to say
communication. So
communication, absolutely.
So that you are also kind of publishing what you are planning to do.
Yeah, being really visible. You mentioned, I'm just going to go back actually, if you don't mind, to Juha's observation around the logistics and mobility system tension that's arising. Can you be a little bit more specific about what some of the competition sounds a very negative word, but some of the tensions, the trade-offs that are happening between those types of ecosystems and the standards that support them?
Something which is actually on the mobility sector, it is more targeted so that the individual traveler can do the traveling. And the logistics is more kind of B2B thing.
Yeah. So you've got more of a you've got a vehicle or the passenger focus, as distinct from the movement and the supply chain kind of perspective. So you're optimizing for a different community in a way.
In a way, but of course, if you think about the passenger is a package to which is being delivered. But it's maybe a different way how you actually start, how you can actually put packages in the containers. That's a different angle on the thing.
Yeah, I've certainly been hearing about, I think already in the States, for example, that your car is your delivery point, and
that's right. Those are a bit converging as well.
You get your Amazon delivery straight into the boot of your car, which you can just open from your app at your office or at home. So
exactly,
really, really fascinating use cases, and they're emerging fast and furiously, I think.
That's indeed. And for example, the drones are one way of moving packages. So that's kind of a new mode also for transportation, not for humans, but more kind of for in the logistics sector.
I think we could keep speaking about this topic for a while, but we're actually close to time. I don't have any more questions coming through on the chat, but time to thank you, Merja, very much for coming along and sharing your insights this afternoon. Thank you. It's been a delight to meet you.
Thank you so much.